Today's lesson is on parallelograms. Okay, we're going to learn about all the properties of parallelograms and then apply them to find the different angles and sides in a given parallelogram. Okay, so first let's start with the properties. I've got the list here, it's on your sheet as well. We'll just read through it and make the markings on the shapes to show what each quality is. Okay, opposite sides are parallel. Okay, remember parallel means they never intersect. So you look at opposite sides on the first parallelogram, go ahead and mark them parallel. Okay, remember the mark for parallel is arrows. Okay, so the two with a single arrow parallel, and then on the other two sides I'll do the double arrow to show they're parallel as well. Okay, opposite sides are congruent. When you're marking congruent, you just need to do hash marks. So say those two sides are opposite, they're congruent, and then the other pair of opposite sides would be on the left and the right. Opposite angles are congruent. Okay, so the opposite angles are the same measure. So say this small angle here has to be congruent to the one across from it, and then the other pair of opposite angles are congruent here and here. Okay, the next property, diagonals are bisected. The diagonals bisect each other. So for this one, you're going to have to draw in the diagonals. So connect one corner to the opposite and one corner to the opposite. Bisected, remember, means the diagonals are cut in half. Okay, so this diagonal is cut to two congruent parts, and the other diagonal is also cut into two congruent parts. Property 5, all pairs of consecutive angles are supplementary. Okay, remember, consecutive means next to each other. Supplementary means they add up to 180 degrees. Okay, so that means this angle and this angle add up to 180. Let's go ahead and label them A and B. Measure of angle A plus measure of angle B equals 180 degrees. And any other pair of angles that are next to each other also equal 180. So say this angle over here is angle C, then angle B plus angle C has to also equal 180 degrees. Okay, because any angles that are next to each other are supplementary. Property 6. One set of opposite sides is both parallel and congruent. Okay, so we're not talking about both pairs of opposite sides here, just pick one side. I'm going to pick the top and the bottom. It says that side is parallel and congruent. So remember, parallel is marking the arrows on it. Okay, so that set of sides is parallel. Also, the same set is congruent. So the same pair of opposite sides is parallel and congruent. Okay, slide down. Let's go ahead and use these properties. Okay, so the first one, find the missing sides of the parallelogram. This refers to the property where opposite sides are congruent. So basically, if I know this side is 9, then the opposite side is also 9. If this side is 4, the side opposite is also 4. Okay, same thing with part B. 7s have to go opposite each other and 3s opposite each other. Okay, check out the one with the angles. Find the missing angles of the parallelogram. Okay, so we did learn that opposite angles were congruent. So 42 is here, that means 42 has to be angle across. However, we're still missing two of the angles. This requires another property. Okay, consecutive angles are supplementary. That means this one plus this one has to add up to 180. So 42 plus whatever this unknown angle is, x, have to be 180 degrees together. So I'll just subtract the 42 from both sides, and I end up with x equals 138. Okay, that means that both of the unknown angles in this diagram are 138. Okay, part B. Same kind of problem. Opposite angles are congruent. So if this angle is 129, I know this one is also 129. And then to figure out the unknown angles, I would just figure out what angle would be supplementary to 129. Okay, so which angle with 129 equals 180? 180 minus 129 is just 51 degrees. So I end up with 51 degrees here and 51 degrees here. Okay, next example. Find the missing pieces of the diagonals of the parallelogram. Okay, so in this one, they're using the property that diagonals bisect each other. Okay, diagonals bisect each other means they cut each other into two congruent parts. So if this part is 4, this part's also 4. If this part is 6, this part's also 6. Okay, if you go to part B, it's a little different. They tell you the entire diagonal is 10. If the entire diagonal is 10, then each part has to be half of 10. Half of 10 is 5. So 5 here and 5 here. Okay, with the second diagonal here, The whole thing's 13. Okay, so if I cut that into half, I get 6.5 on this side, 6.5 on this side, and then the two diagonals are bisecting each other. Okay, example 4. We've got to find x and y in each parallelogram. Okay, so we're going to use the properties of the parallelogram to solve for those variables. Okay, if you look at part A, what I notice is that I know some of the sides and the other sides have variables. So the easiest thing to do, I think, is remember that opposite sides have to be congruent, and then I can make an equation. If this side's 31 and this one is 3x plus 7, then I can make my equation 31 equals 3x plus 7. Okay, then I can solve for x using the algebra you guys learned last year. Subtract the 7 on both sides, end up with 24 equals 3x, divide by 3, and x equals 8. Okay, so I've got half the problem done. The other half is the other two sides. Okay, the 65 and the 7y minus 5, they have to be equal because opposite sides are congruent. So 65 equals 7y minus 5, and then I just need to solve the equation. Plus 5, plus 5. Okay, so 70 equals 7y, and then my last step, divide both sides by 7, and I end up with y equals 10. Cool. Okay, and then finally, with my last parallelogram, I've got to solve for x and y again. On this one, I'm going to use the property that the diagonals bisect each other. Notice 9 and x plus 4 are two segments of the same diagonal. Okay, since the diagonals bisect each other, I know those segments have to be congruent. So 9 equals x plus 4 is my first equation. And then I just need to subtract 4 from both sides, and I get x equals 5. Okay, so that's my first variable. To find y, focus on the other diagonal. This segment and this segment have to be congruent because the diagonals bisect each other. So I set 5 equal to y minus 2. And then I just solve for y. So plus 2 gets me y equals 7. Okay, so that's the second variable. Okay, so we've got one more problem to do. Go ahead and check out the next one. Use the diagram of parallelogram QRST to answer each question. Okay, so basically you have to look at the different parts listed on the left and figure out what they're congruent to or parallel to based on the picture on the right. Okay, so let's start with TQ. TQ would be this segment. It's congruent to the segment opposite it. So opposite would be SR, so that's what I'm going to put on the line. RQ would be this segment. It would be congruent to the segment opposite it, which would be ST. Okay, and then we get SV is congruent. SV is this part. It would be congruent to the other part of that diagonal. Okay, because remember diagonals bisect each other, so SV is congruent to VQ. Let's go to the next congruent ones. We'll do the parallel ones last. Okay, so angle TSR. TSR would be this angle. It's congruent to the angle that would be opposite it. So that would be TQR. Angle TVQ. TVQ would be this one right here. Well, this is not exactly a property of a parallelogram. This is just kind of review. Remember, vertical angles, TVQ, would have to be congruent to the angle across from it in that X. Okay, so SVR. And then angle QSR. QSR would be this one right here. QSR would have to be congruent. Again, this isn't really property of parallelogram because this is not an angle on the parallelogram. However, we do know that since opposite sides are parallel, alternate interior angles are congruent. So QSR would have to be congruent to this one, TQS. Okay, and then finally let's do the parallel parts. QT is parallel to the one opposite it, which would be SR. And then ST is parallel to the one opposite it, which would be RQ. Okay, so that follows all the properties of the parallelograms. We're going to learn about other types of parallelograms next lesson, but for now, have a good day. See you tomorrow.